On today's Two on Your Side Town Hall, digging into that new Bills Stadium proposal that would make it one of the smallest venues in the NFL. We have an expert to go over those plans with us.
Plus, safety concerns with tackle football. For parents who may be thinking about enrolling their children in the sport, we've got some information to help you make that informed decision.
And the truth about those plexiglass partitions separating everyone from colleagues to customers and classmates as Western New York works to keep COVID-19 at bay.
That's our newsroom. We've got this.
Yes.
Thanks for joining us for the town hall today. So we're going to start here with the story that is dominating the conversation among a whole lot of Western New Yorkers right now. That report from earlier today from the Associated Press detailing what the franchise wants in terms of a new stadium.
So whether you love football or maybe you just couldn't care less, if you pay taxes, it does affect you. Before we talk it over with a top expert in the industry tonight, here are some of the headlines in this Associated Press report. First, it says the Bills want a new 60,000-seat stadium in Orchard Park.
Yeah, that will be the smallest capacity of any NFL stadium right now. The proposal would not include a roof, though we're told most of the seats would be covered, so people are wondering what to make of that. The stadium will be completed by the year 2027, and it would come with a $1.4 billion price tag. We do have our guest here. I think we might have the wrong number pulled up in the control room, but I know that our guest is here, so let me know what we're going to do here. All right, we're going to get to our guest to talk about that with the Bills coming up in just a minute.
But first, though, we're going to stick with football for a second and a story from our Verified team. There's been a lot of research over the past decade or even longer regarding
He's a Hall of Famer, a Super Bowl champ, and holds several NFL records. Now Brett Favre with a message for parents. Don't let your kids play tackle football until they're 14 years old. The warning says tackling increases the chances of developing a serious brain disease known as CTE. Viewers have asked, are youth football players more at risk for developing CTE? Let's verify. We have 4 sources: an expert who focuses on rehab for people with spinal cord injury and disease, a neurologist, the CDC, and the Journal of the American Medical Association. Here's what we know. First, what is CTE? Dr. Michael Yokelson says it's a brain disease caused by concussions. Symptoms develop over time and can be very serious.
They may start to have problems with cognition, so developing dementia. They can develop Parkinsonism, so movement disorders, tremors. They can develop more serious psychological or psychiatric issues.
Are athletes under age 14 more at risk?
I think that we still don't know for sure what the magic number is.
He says any contact sport increases your child's chance of concussions and CTE. The key here is their brains are still developing.
If children begin to have concussions at an earlier age, it may have a greater, more lasting impact.
He says the younger they start, the more concussions they could have over time. A new report from the CDC finds kids in tackle football are 15 times more likely to suffer head injuries. And data from JAMA says 21% of high school football players had CTE. The tricky thing is it's hard to know if your child has it.
That's why at this time still the most reliable way to make the actual diagnosis is on autopsy.
Neurologist Dr. Walter Royal says you can reduce risk by making sure your child wears protective gear and gets proper treatment for any head injury. So we can verify younger kids in contact sports are at a higher risk for developing CTE. And I know that's tough for a lot of parents to hear. I mean, started playing football when I was 6 years old and played my whole life. You hope that the technology is coming along and that the equipment is getting better and they can make it safer, but it's troubling to hear all that, and that's science.
Yeah, a combination of those things and a little bit more awareness about it as well. We want to get back to our top story tonight. Joining us live is Marc Gannon. He's been on the show a few times with us. He's president of SportsCorp. He's a top expert when it comes to the business side of professional sports. And Marc, thanks again for coming back. We so appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Yeah, you're the perfect person to help guide us through this. We want to start with what everyone is talking about here in terms of this article. The top line number, 60,000 seats. I looked this up today, all of the stadiums in the league. The average is about 66,799 seats. So this will be well below that, well below what the Bills have right now. What's your reaction to that number? And what do you say to people who are just wondering, like, how is that going to be enough seats? Oh, Mark, are you hearing us okay?
You just came back.
Oh, just
I can
came
hear
back.
you okay now.
Yeah, tell us about that 60,000 seats. What are we to make about 60,000 seats?
Number of seats. It's not really, people may make a big deal of the reduction in the number of seats, that it's gone down, if it goes down to 60,000, but that's really not a problem. First, you have to think about that Buffalo is the second smallest market in the NFL. The second thing to think about is that you want a scarcity of tickets rather than people being able to always get tickets to a very large stadium. And the third is, and this is something that people don't necessarily understand until they think about it, those last 10 or 20,000 seats are actually the most expensive seats to construct and generate the least amount of revenue. It has to do with the geometry and how big you have to build the stadium, and then also all the support services from plumbing and bathrooms to concessions for those last 10 or 20,000 seats. The NFL has been looking at having smaller number of seats in stadiums for quite a while now. And so this is not a surprise to me. And actually, in many ways, it does make sense.
And Mark, there have been years in which the Bills sold more than 60,000 season tickets, most of the time between 50 and 60. What about those people? We certainly know there's a lot of them. They've been those longtime season ticket holders. This proposed stadium wouldn't be able to hold them all.
Well, when it comes to a new stadium and the cost of building it and how the funds come in and who sits where, there's kind of a romanticism about somebody who's had seats for 40 or 50 years and wants to be in exactly the same seat, but in the brand new stadium. That really isn't general. And by the way, and pay only the general admission ticket price. That's not a realistic end result. There will be choices. Some of the fans are going to have to decide whether they want to sit right where they were or get a lesser expensive seat. Some fans may decide that they don't want to they'd rather watch the games on TV and then use, StubHub or Ticketmaster to buy tickets for 1 or 2 or 3 games a year rather than season tickets. It's the nature of when you go into a new stadium that you're going to have some dislocation. It's just going to happen, and there are going to be lots of stories you guys are going to cover about these fans and fathers and daughters being angry about this or that. It's inevitable. It happens each and every time. But once everybody gets used to it, once they get to the seats they are, and then they can move around a little bit, things just tend to work themselves out.
All right, we'll hope for the best on that. So, Mark, one of the things that we saw as we posted this story online today, and of course, everybody has a feeling about all of these specifics that we're getting, but besides the 60,000 number, there's also this question about what kind of stadium it's going to be. Most of us didn't think it was going to be a dome because the price tag kind of told us that they weren't going to spend enough money to do that. So it is open air, but this reporting is now that the majority of the seats are still going to be covered. I mentioned, I think about the stadium out on the West Coast, out in Seattle.
Yes.
What do you make of that? I look at that stadium. I don't think it's the most attractive stadium out there. That's just my personal opinion. What do you make of that?
Well, there are a couple of factors here. Whether that one's very attractive or not, I absolutely understand where you're coming from on that. But there are 2 major benefits to just having a covering over a large number of the stands. First one is it really helps when it's raining or when you have snow or that kind of thing. There'll be less that will be on the seats and in the seating bowl. And if you design it properly, substantially less rain and snow. The second is it does unbelievable things to the crowd noise. It basically magnifies all the crowd noise that would otherwise go up and out and bounces it right back on the field and creates a really incredible home field advantage.
Finally, Mark, we want to talk to you a little about transparency because, of course, everybody wants to know what is going on with this. And our reporting partners at Investigative Post have filed an open records request to get a copy of the study the Bills had done. That was rejected. There is a proposed bill in the state legislature to make these negotiations more open to the public. How has that gone in other cities?
It goes in many different directions. The thing you have to keep in mind, there really, again, 2 primary factors, especially in Buffalo, we need to keep in mind. First, as a general rule, you don't want to open the oven while the cake or the souffle is being baked because it's just not going to look good during that process. So you've got to really give it some time for the cake to bake and then to be able to show after some tough negotiations and discussions. This is the general these are the general parameters of what we're talking about doing. I know that that doesn't satisfy the media and the fans in the early stages, but the reality is that's the best way to get it done. I have a rule of thumb. These projects are inversely proportional, getting it done versus the amount of publicity they get. So if you have less publicity, it's more likely the deal will get done. And ultimately, that's what you want to have done. The second part of this is urgency. Let me tell you, one of the things that because I've talked to quite a few people within the league over the last few weeks since we've started having these discussions. There's a window of opportunity right now to get a deal done. There are a lot of political things at play. You have the new governor who's from Buffalo. You've got a whole bunch of people up for re-election. You've got quite a bit of infrastructure and money that's come from the federal government that is in Albany right now that's going to be apportioned around the state. And you've got a stadium that really doesn't have much left in its useful life and its safety life. There's a window of time now, and if there would be one bit of advice, unsolicited advice, but advice nonetheless, that I would give to the local officials and the local fans, sense of urgency. There's a window of time to get this done now. If it doesn't, that generally means that it's going to be either more expensive or sometimes you start looking around, and when you have to start looking around, you may realize the grass is greener on the other side. You don't want that to happen. You want the sense of urgency today, and the politicians really need to understand that.
You talk about opening the oven too early. If you do that, you're going to end up with something you said that doesn't look very good, like that stadium out in Seattle, and we don't want that. Marc He, president of SportsCorp Limited. Great to get your insight, Marc. Thank you.
My pleasure.